Oh, good. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me back and coming to our second session on ethical legacies and ethical wills. For those of you who don't recall, my name is David Levin. I'm a rabbi in the community, and Charles and Marion and Rabbi Eli were generous enough to invite me to come in to this wonderful place and spend some time talking about a subject which is very near and dear to my heart. As I hope you picked up last week, and for those of you who are not from last week and here for the first time, trust me, it was near and dear to my heart. So, I want to start with I want to start by seeing if I can make this actually work. Okay. I want to start by, again, saying thank you for coming, but also acknowledging something that one of your friends shared with me. Gail was kind enough to reach out and say, you know, our rabbis are very good at making sure we all know each other and that we introduce each other. And I want to not let that moment pass because I think it's really very important. Because we have only a limited amount of time together, I'm not going to do the more formal introductions where we get a chance to go around the room. But I do want to highlight, well, first I'd like the folks who are next to each other, as soon as I'm done talking, to say hello to each other, introduce yourselves if you haven't already. We do have name tags, which should make that a bit easier. But I also want to underscore the importance of our getting to know ourselves in this process. So this is, if you remember, I talked last week about a cheshbon hanefesh, that we have our own accounting of what it is that we're looking to do as part of this process of learning. And we need to get in touch with ourselves to get a sense as to who we are we on the right track, and what are the corrective measures that we might want to engage if, in fact, we're not on the right track and we'd like to get back on track. Or even consider changing tracks, as the case might be. So that piece of being in touch with ourselves is critically important. And as I was sharing just a moment ago, we have a difference in perceptions. The people that we think we are and that we project is one piece, and the other piece is how we are received. There's a lot of Talmud about that, where 2 becomes 4, because there's an active giving as well as an active receiving, or a passive receiving and a passive giving. And then because of those, 2 can actually become 4 if you're a mathematical Talmud, was the permutations actually play themselves out. So all of those pieces factor in to what it is that we're trying to accomplish through this process of ethical legacies and connection. So it is very much about relationships and how we do this. And I really do appreciate, Gail, you're bringing that up to make sure that we had a chance to address it. So if you would find the person who's reasonably close, say hi. It's kind of like Kabbalah Shabbat, say hello, friendly.
Richard, nice to see you.
So I will just make sure that everybody who is here has a chance to get the materials that we have in the back. Our lecture and everything that we've got up on the screen is contained here, plus also the questions that I had shared with you last week. We've included those, plus a single example of what an ethical will might look like. But again, I do want to make everybody aware, and again caution, that this is an individual experience, to individuals by an individual, or to a family by individuals, or to friends by an individual. So there's a lot of this, but it starts in real ways with us. Today we're going to concentrate on what to do. So last time we spent a little bit of time developing our legacy. Today we're going to go a little bit further with that. We're also going to determine who it is for, and then we'll begin the process of creating an ethical legacy will. And as I have shared with you, I think one of the strengths of modern technology gives us the power of sight and sound to make that connection more profound and deeper. The traditional way of leaving something is wonderful. The problem with traditional ways of doing it is the discipline and time that it takes, that you need to invest in doing that. It's more difficult than it sounds. And we want to be able to, at least from my perspective, not make it a posthumous letter to people that we care about, but make it a living document that we can share on an ongoing basis. Because as we share with Torah, as we approach Torah with a new perspective, the same parsha, with a different perspective, just by virtue of living an extra year of life, so too is our life experience. We are, listened to a wonderful TED Talk just last week about the issue of time. You know, when do we become our full selves? Our fully integrated, mature, fully present self. Ponder that for just a second. And I would suggest, right now. I would also suggest you would have said that same answer 5 years ago. And I will suggest also, too, that you will use that same answer 5 years from now. The issue that I'm trying to bring up is we are in a constant state of becoming. We are different. We are continuing to grow through life experience, through our interaction with other people. All of that stuff has an impact. Plus our age. Our bodies react differently to the world. I've learned that that is a lot further away than it used to be. So I used to stoop and pick up pennies, and now it's got to be a quarter. And what I learned in playing with a bunch of doggies the other day with my wife, because we're contemplating becoming parents of a puppy. Anyway, I learned that squatting, I pride myself on being in reasonably good shape. I'm at the gym 3 times a week, and I'm really working hard, and all in all, I'm doing okay. But then I needed to squat to pet with the puppies. Yeah, it didn't work. I could either go all the way down, or I could stay up here and kind of bend and play. But I wasn't squatting because these knees were struggling after about 30 seconds with being in that position. So I got down on the floor and I played with the puppies, had a great time. Getting back up was a bit of a challenge. But my point to you is that despite that very, very nominal change in my physical capacity, I still consider myself living a full life, fully physical, fully involved, even if maybe the parameters in which I do it are a little bit narrower than they were, like all of us. But that's okay. We still can live a full, vibrant life. And to go back to one of the other issues, as teachers, we always have something important to share with everybody else, including, when you get old, that me. Don't go doing those stupid things to your body when you're young, because you will pay for it when you get older. Thank you, Mom. But that's all true. And that wisdom, that experience, all helps us remain vital and active with the people with whom we're connecting. So this is what we're going to do for our time today together. I want to go back and revisit. In order to develop our legacies, I want to go back and revisit our inner elders as a way to connect to our core values and as a way of finding values in our stories. So as I mentioned to you, we're going to talk about our inner elder. We went and visited the inner elder last time. I asked as we closed our session to close your eyes and contemplate walking up that set of steps to going and visiting that person who is that inner wise soul, who has seen it all, who knows it all. And I'd like to suggest that when we go back, we're going to go back and we're going to revisit somebody who's warm and friendly and embracing, not judgmental in any way. Somebody who knows us because they are us. Somebody who cares about us because they are us. And I also hope that in going back and visiting them this time, it's an easier trip. It feels a little bit closer. It's a little bit easier to get to. I always seem to remember that the first trip to some place took like forever. Coming home seemed to go a whole lot faster. Getting lost notwithstanding, but the direct trip. And then the second time, when you were more familiar, it seemed to go a little bit faster as well. The time didn't necessarily change, but our perceptions of the thing that we were going to does. And this inner elder is actually a friend. And this inner elder might actually turn out to be that soul inside of us, that connection inside of us, that conscious inside of us, that conscience inside of us, that can help us figure out how to navigate. Good person to talk to. It might be called our gut instinct, perhaps. But that is a person that we want to rely upon, to talk to actively, to engage with and find out, am I doing what I think is the right thing, or am I just doing the politically expedient and I'm rationalizing? And your core is going to be able to say to you when you're connecting honestly whether or not you are. So I want us to be able to have this conversation, and I want us to be able to move forward and actively engage. So this time, when we go and visit our inner elder, I'd like us to talk about, first of all, say hi. It's like meeting an old friend, so say hi. I want us to talk about the challenges that we've confronted so far in our lives, good and bad, because they both shaped us. Things that bring us joy. What are the things that really motivate us? What are the things that bring joy? Is it a friendship? Is it a particular philanthropic work? Is it family? Is it that little puppy that I'm probably going to end up getting? And for me, that inner elder, as much as I am on the road a lot, and I talk, and I go, and I do, and I play, and I love the freedom, as a boy growing up, having a dog has been a powerful part of my upbringing and my understanding of who I am. When my dog died back, I got him when I was 5, and he lasted through my first year of college. I felt like I lost my best friend. And for any of you who have had an animal for any length of time, you know the intimacy that kind of a relationship can foster. It's not a human relationship, but it's a really quality relationship. So the question becomes, if that is the thing that brings you joy, then that's the thing that maybe you pursue. A couple of readers that I've been talking to, they've been talking about creating emotional support animals, bringing them into hospitals, and the joy that they're getting through bringing these animals in and seeing other people find relief. Wow. And this woman was a jeweler before she decided to discover this aspect of her life. Midlife is when she decided to become a breeder. So there's all kinds of things. And what do we have yet to do? We all have things yet to do. There's very, very little that we can say is fully accomplished, which is a good thing. I think it gives us a chance to engage, to move forward, to talk about tomorrow with an element of hope and expectation. And it gives us something to do on a Saturday night. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I say that with an element of seriousness. There are things that we have yet to do in all aspects of our lives. And the last one, which I think is particularly important, and Gail understands this intimately well, relationships that we need to nurture. We are social animals. You don't have to have a spouse to be a social creature or to be fulfilled as a social creature. You don't have to have children to fulfill yourself as a social creature. But I would suggest to you that wherever you are, whoever you are, human connection is extraordinarily important. So if you have a spouse, then the question is, or a partner, the question is, how do I nurture that relationship and deepen it? Or my kids, or my parents, or my friends, or the community in which I am working, or the philanthropy that I've decided I want to be a part of because it resonates for me. And I have people of like interest. As I had mentioned earlier to someone in the room as we were talking, one of the permutations of this, I think it actually was Gail, one of the permutations of this work that I do is to bring it into synagogues to create affinity groups where we get to share stories. And when we get to share stories, we get to hear common values. And when we hear about common values, then we are drawn closer to those people as a result of the things that we're sharing, which means that we want to deepen those relationships even further. So it becomes an opportunity to coalesce and to bring us together with people that are like us, with people that we would like to like us, and people that we would also like to like. So all of these things become, I think, critically important to who we are and where we're going. I don't know if any of you watch television, but Henry Louis Gates, the historian from Harvard, has found a new career on a show called Finding Your Roots. And he goes out and, using the most sophisticated of techniques, has this wonderful opportunity. He's got all kinds of people and Ancestry.com on steroids and all kinds of things, so genetics and local records, and they think nothing of traveling to Latvia to go find some records from 1426. Us, maybe not so much. But the stories that he brings to the celebrities that become the subject are fascinating and revealing. And I think we all begin to share some of that because of the explosion of things like Heritage.com, Ancestry.com. If you're Jewish, there's something called Genie, which is connected to my heritage. So we're all looking for roots. We're all looking for connection. We're all looking to understand how we got here. Our tradition teaches that we've gotten here as part of a chain. We're the most recent link on a chain that goes all the way back to the beginning of our history. And what makes us unique, or one of the things that makes us unique, is that that history goes back thousands of years. So the idea that we can actually find our connections becomes important. It's a good understanding of who we are, the values that were nurtured and inculcated into our memory DNA. Great-grandma did it and created a certain mindset. Grandpa did it. My parents did it. It feels like it's in my blood. We've all had a something like that. We've all had a something like that. I think the cute story is the woman who was teaching her daughter, and don't know sexism intended, but the woman is teaching her daughter how to cook a brisket according to the family tradition. And she brings her daughter in, and they're all excited to share this extraordinary moment, and the woman starts by cutting off the end of the brisket, and then seasoning it, and placing it in the pan, and the child looks at Mom and goes, Mom, why did you cut the end off? She said, well, that's part of the process. That's what Grandma taught me. And she went, oh, but why did she do that? And the response was, well, I don't know. why don't we go ask Grandma? Because this is the way that we make the family brisket. So they went off to Grandma and they had the conversation. So Grandma, we were making brisket. I learned how to make brisket your way. Oh, that's wonderful. That's terrific. So what did you do? Well, we started by cutting off the end. And I really didn't understand why we cut off the end. And Grandma kind of looks quizzically at her daughter, the mom, and like, you cut off the end? She said, yeah, that's how you taught me. I cut off the end. But your granddaughter really wants to know why. And she said, well, honestly, it didn't fit in the pan. But it gets elevated in a kind of an interesting way. We have what I'm calling personal midrashim. The stories that have not only a story, but a story to tell in terms of the morals that affect us. We all have these. We don't necessarily know that we have these, but they're all locked away. For me, I'm going to share a story which is, maybe I'll share two stories. My mother's father came over, so my great-grandfather, my maternal great-grandfather. Okay, 2 lines up. I called him Zadie, which is Yiddish for grandpa, because that's what Mom called him. And I had the good fortune of knowing Zadie, but everybody called him Zadie. He had, my great-grandfather and great-grandmother had 6 children, and the brood multiplied as you would expect. Came over on the boat, was a learned man who was also a tailor, Orthodox line, real patriarch of the family. And when my parents had me, the decision was that we were going to be raised as Reformed Jews. Well, that was quite a break, and that has to do with the second story. But the decision was made that we would be raised as Reformed Jews. My grandmother, my mother's mother, looked at Mom and said, you tell Grandpa, because I'm not going to be the one giving him a heart attack and killing him. Reform. That's ridiculous. Well, being an Orthodox man, there was a certain amount of trepidation that this patriarch of the family would respond, shall we say, negatively. So my mother committed to visiting Zadie, and the conversation that she related to me is the one that I will share. Because she walked in the room, kind of like that scene, that classic scene that we've seen a couple of different times in a couple of different movies. You know, in the study, surrounded by his books, an old man, wise but incredibly learned, a scholar and revered by everybody. So there was an element of fear. As loving as he was, there was an element of fear when you entered that room. Zadie, this is what we're going to do. And she said that she was waiting for the entire room to come crashing down on her. And he listened, he paused, and he said, Gina, look, there's more than one way to be Jewish. Teach your boy to love God and to be a good boy. That wisdom gave me the benefit of having 6 wonderful years of memories with this extraordinary man. I got to know him. I got to love him. He shaped who I am and my understanding of a way which isn't narrow and constricted, but open and beautiful. A relationship to Judaism where I adore the orthodoxy from which he came, from which I came. As much as I adore the Reformed Judaism that was given to me. And it gives me my capacity to do my work in outreach in a way that is enlightened and informed and loving. And he was a guy I deeply missed because he wasn't at my bar mitzvah. Everybody that I wanted, he was the guy that needed to be there. And unfortunately, he didn't live to see it. But I carry him, as you can tell, very vividly. He shaped me. That's one of my midrashes. That's one of my stories. My other story that I like to share because I think that it helps understand who I am. My dad, I made fun, for those of you who weren't here, I made fun of my grandfather last week. My father's father. I don't want to be equal opportunity here. My father's father, if you'll recall, I made fun. I made some sort of an irreverent crack about how he told me that, these are the best years of your life when you go off to college. And I made some snarky responses as an adolescent might do. I love that man too. And I don't want you to think that that moment of irreverence wasn't part of something broader and more special. I met the guy that I know, sort of, or that I knew, may he rest in peace as well, was short, kind of round, kind of doddering, incredibly sweet, incredibly loving, incredibly giving. Every weekend, he and Grandma were with the family. Up until the time that she died, at which point my father made sure that Grandma was with us every weekend. He was a special and extraordinary, soft, sweet man with a bunch of morals and a bunch of interesting stories. But that's the man that I knew, 70s, 80s, up into his 90s. That's the guy who I have remembrance of. I went into the family business before I found this other family business. But I went into the family business. We were in schmackes, started by my grandfather in an old silk mill. Stories of my grandma sewing the labels into the sweaters that he sold, and the stories about the shortages in World War II and how they had to allocate, and the stories of her trying to create a business and trying to make something out of nothing is the story that I inherited from the family legacy business side. But we need to go back before that. My grandfather was also from Orthodox stock. They were Jews who lived in the Bronx on Nobel Avenue, for those of you who are familiar with that part of the world. And my great-grandfather on that side had, to say the least, a strong personality. Also came over on the boat, ruled essentially with an iron fist. My grandfather had an interesting response. He packed his bags, left New York, and became a traveling salesman on the Southern Rail line. And while traveling the southern states in the 20s, ended up staying at my other great-grandmother's boarding house outside of Dallas, where he met the girl, 14, 15, the girl who would become my grandmother. A beautiful, willowy, 5'11", blue-eyed, red-haired Southern Baptist. That was my grandfather. He told my great-grandfather where he could put his stuff and took off for a life on his own. Eventually bringing his wife and their 2 children, one of whom was my dad, back to the Bronx. You can imagine the fun family dinners that were happening at that particular point in time. When my grandmother died, she was fully revered as one of the integral parts of our family. A tribute to who she was, certainly, but also a tribute to that story and that incredible art. So although I met and loved this beautiful, doddering old man, sweet, kind, soft old man. Man, would I love to have met that 20-year-old who had enough courage and fire in his belly to strike out on his own. What an incredible man he must have been. What an incredible story, what an incredible life he lived. And he shared some of those stories with us. But what an incredible, incredible thing. That also helped inform me that there's more than one way to be Jewish. There's more than one way to constitute family, that it's love that's truly the important value that drives. And it can be fraught, and it can be complex. But boy, would I really have loved to have connected with that guy too. Which is why that idea of the peer conversation process that I talked about last week, where we record in real time so that we can actually have conversations with the next generation when they enter into that same life cycle, becomes so important. Because although I'd like to think that going off to become a rabbi at the age of 50 is a pretty courageous thing to do. Others might call it just dumb, but I'm going to go with courageous for those of you who will allow me that. I'd like to think that part of that courage to pursue your dream is something I inherited from him. And I'd like to think that going off and doing something like this is something that he would have approved of. And I would love to have been able to have that conversation with him. Like, what were you thinking when you took that huge leap of faith? What drove you? What gave you the guts to pull that off? What an incredible guy. So those are the stories that make who I am. Those are similar to the very stories that each and every one of us has. Thing is, have we connected with them ourselves to understand who we are? And have we then taken the next step to be able to share that with the next generation or with our friends or the people that we're trying to help understand who we are and what motivates us to do the things that we do, to think the things that we do, to feel the things that we feel. These are our personal midrashim. Every bit as beautiful and as valuable as the ones that we find in our wisdom texts, because they are our stories. So I'm going to actually ask you to engage in an exercise. And this is going to be an interesting time. I want to actually try this out with you. Because part of this, so now we're at a stumbling block. Well, what are my stories? How do I access my stories? It can be overwhelming. It can actually create a paralysis. Where do I start? You can start with something pretty innocuous. So on the very back, hopefully I stapled it all together, on the very last page is the list of questions that I shared last week. And these are opportunities for us to enter into this space. Where do we start? Where do we start? Sometimes it can be innocuous. What's your favorite food? I like that one.
You want to stand here aloud? Were you looking for answers?
Well, no, well, do you have a favorite food?
Yes.
What's your favorite food?
Chicken.
Why?
I don't even know why, but it's like I've always loved chicken.
Who made it for you when you were a kid?
Well, my mother.
Okay. And when did she serve chicken? What particular kind of chicken do you like?
Roast chicken.
When did she make roast chicken?
She wasn't really, it doesn't have to do with the week, with the Sabbath. We didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Periodically.
She'd make a special chicken dinner.
I love the way she roasted chicken. And I've been teased about it in my world a lot over the years.
Well, it's not going to stop. We'll tease you some more tonight if you don't mind. But that's exactly the place of starting. Something innocuous. Chicken dinner. My mom used to make chocolate cake for dessert. My mom used to make chocolate cake for special occasions. My mom actually really knew how to make chocolate cake well, and that's the thing that she, so it was like special occasions, not special occasions, whenever she could, Mom made chocolate cake. She made this chocolate with a rich fudge icing. Basically, it was just like chocolate on steroids. It was amazing. And I would get a chance to be in the kitchen with her. Now, I'm probably conflating a bunch of stories, but I remember this particular house, this particular kitchen, I got to lick the spoon. By the time she was all done, I got to lick the spoon. My story isn't about chocolate cake. My story is about that special time that a boy has with his mom. My story is about that beautiful bonding experience because we were making the chocolate cake that I remember we were making for my dad's birthday. So the chocolate cake is really a symbol for my relationship with my mom, for the nurturing of family and that special love that the two of us shared, for that extraordinary moment of bringing the family together to celebrate. It's a lot more than just the chocolate cake. So as you think about that roast chicken, you too are going to, and my grandmother, the one from Texas, she used to make macaroni and cheese and fried chicken. Those were really her two claims to fame when it came to food, and they were fabulous. And back before I was keeping kosher, together they were even more fabulous. So I'm just sharing that. But, you know, having the family at the table, having that big raucous gathering in the second floor walk-up in her apartment, those are the things that begin to come out. So my values about family, my values about love, my values about my relationship with my mom, those become the values that come out of this simple, what's your favorite food? Sounds innocuous, but it's so revealing. So what I'd like you to do, we have a list of questions, and here's where it's going to get interesting. I'd like us to break up into chevrita. In other words, two people. If we have one extra person, we could do 3 people. But I'd like to do 2 people. You can know them or you cannot know them. In fact, if you don't know them, it's actually beneficial. I would prefer that if we have a partnership here, that you split the partners and go to people that you don't know as well. So what I'd like you to do, choose a question, and I'd like you to ask that other person, spend 5 minutes asking what it is that you want to ask. And based on the response, ask the follow-up question. So with the food, what was your favorite food? Who made it? When did they make it? And begin to just have a conversation asking your other person about the answer to the question. And then, here's where it gets really interesting. When you've got that data, I then want you to assess from that data the values that are important to that person based on the story that they've just told you. Then I'd like you to switch. 5 minutes with the other person as the interviewer. Whatever question you would like on this particular thing. And it's not we have to find a question to stump. If it's a question that you're not comfortable with, let's just move to a different question.
Who picks the question?
The interviewer. The interviewer. They just ask the question. If there's a particular reason why you would prefer not to respond to that question, just say so and choose a different question. But again, 5 minutes asking about it, and then a minute assessing what the values are that you heard based on that conversation. And then I would like to have everybody come back. It'll take us about 10, 11 minutes, well, 12 minutes if we actually count. But use this time to get together and work together. So I'm going to ask you to find a partner and go for it.
I know you, but I don't know.
That's the next part.
All right, so what I'm noticing is, I'm noticing a couple of things. One, my directions could probably have been a little bit more clear, perhaps. Two, it just happens every once in a while to the rabbi in the front of the room, you're not listening to me. Not the first time that's happened, God willing, not the last. So let me, based on that second one, let me ask you, how many people stopped the conversation before they actually were completely finished with all of the things that they were thinking about or talking about? Was there more left to say?
Sure.
I'm guessing it. If you were in conversation, the chances are, that there was more left. Yeah. And once you started talking about something, it triggers other memories and it gets you excited. You want to continue to have that conversation. And the other piece, sharing is actually fun. I mean, talking about ourselves is something actually we enjoy doing. We just don't often get the space to do it. But when we're talking about something which is deeply interesting to us, our personal stories, well, that is something that really connects for us. So now let me ask another question. How many people feel that they have gotten to know this person that they were talking to better than they knew them 10 minutes ago? That should almost be a rhetorical kind of question. Anybody who says no to that, well, we need to talk because that's really interesting. Let me now ask for a couple of volunteers. What did you learn value-wise from the story that was shared, if anybody would like to? Yes?
Brian is a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
His parents are lawyers. His grandparents are lawyers. Discussion at the dinner table was political, ethical, human rights, Vietnam War protesters, not his parents. And his brother is a lawyer. So
That would be
he comes by.
It's over there.
No escaping the dark force. What can you do about it?
He comes, it's not easy, I mean, it's not difficult to figure out why he became a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Although he could have been a renegade, he didn't India.
Could have been a rabbi, yeah. Well, anybody else? Yeah, right.
Yeah, so Carol, I asked Carol who was her favorite people or person, and she immediately went to her grandfather, Charles Casiments. Charles Casiments. And she said that her grandfather would go to Florida every year and write a letter to each one of his children's families, a separate letter. And he would always, he was a self-taught immigrant, and self-taught in terms of English. He would always sign his letter, Charles Casiment, so everyone knew who he was. And I asked about his values. So Charles, he was kind. He was the kindest, nicest, gentlest, most easygoing, most unflappable, loving person in her life. And he went to Minyan every day. And the day he did not attend Minyan, he was how many years old?
103.
103 years old. And that was the day that he went to sleep in a chair. And that was his last breath. Yeah. And the values that he shared with Carol and assuming the rest of his family was compassion, trying to stand in other person's shoes, don't take yourself so seriously, and to be forgiving.
Values that you're living, is my guess, or trying.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
It's a work in progress.
Ain't it the truth? That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you both. Anybody else want to take a stab at this, Michael?
So I met Meryl today for the first time. My sister's name is Meryl. Her husband is Michael. Brother. So it's a small world kind of background. The thing that struck me about Merle's story at the values level were not things that were necessarily said, but the experiences her father had. Her father was raised at Girard College and ended up, as most people who graduate from live and grow up at Girard College, had a very successful life because of that. So it struck me about the importance of this value of giving back to others, and this multi-generational institution gave him a life. But what was interesting is because Girard College is non-religious, he grew up with no religion, and yet at some point, as a young adult, he decided that it was important to go back and find his Jewish roots. And so they had Judaism played a very important part in Merle's upbringing and revitalized that. So it was an interesting set of experiences, and talked about values that we don't always focus on.
Lovely, lovely. And that's why you're here, I guess, right? Part of the explanation for your affiliation with this place. Yeah.
So about Marion, I was struck, the question was asking about faith. And Marion was so articulate about it and very clear. And yet at the end, she said, oh, I hope I remember this. I'm thinking, wow, it came out of your mouth as if it were formulated in your brain forever. But it strikes me that the process is, and you of course could comment on this, that the process of having a dialogue helps us say things that we didn't know we knew, or wouldn't know in some other way. I don't know how you think about that.
I think you're right, because you're answering a question, and it's a quiet, safe space to answer that question and not be judged or anything like that.
And by the way, not that I want to make this a commercial for the work that I do, but that's precisely the power of the interviewing. Not only does it help you through the process of getting it done, but it also, in the process of conversation, gets you to go places where, just answering the question by yourself would have stopped you far before you had much more to say.
Yes, I think it's helpful that you're speaking to someone, otherwise you're having a conversation in your head with yourself, which, I could go in circles.
Anybody else want to share what they discovered about somebody?
I'm happy to share what Valerie said, and she picked up on the food theme, because she thought about her family going out for Chinese food every Sunday night, which made me smile because I shared with her that that's where Jews are.
Yeah, very deeply Jewish.
Right. But what she thought about is they probably ordered dinner for two that was $5, and it had everything that you would want, from soup to the crystals and the ice cream and desserts. But she thinks now about what that struggle was for her dad, who probably worked 2 or 3 jobs just to create that family time together and be able to go out to eat. And she finds that incredibly inspiring right now that he did that just to pay for that dinner, and all of what went into that for him to be able to take his family out.
So I'm going to take friend privilege here for just a moment, because I happen to know Valerie personally. She and my wife and I are dear friends. I know that those values play out in the way that she raises her daughter. That she's a living testimony to that set of values. And I know that for a fact. Everything she does, everything she tries to do is all about Catherine having the best possible life that she could possibly have. So I hear that loud and clear. And it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. So that's where this stuff is really cool. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. Would anyone else like to share?
I learned, I have not obviously, but I have obviously never met Stephanie before.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned from Stephanie that one of the most important reasons for her to create an ethical will is to because she had a very difficult time with her current, with her first husband, with her children's father, because he was sick. And as a nurse and his wife, it was her job to take care of him when her children were quite little. And she said one of the most important reasons she wants to write an ethical will is so that her children, as young adults and as they get older, will know, even though we all hope that our children only have good ahead of them, that whatever hits you that may be less than wonderful, you just have to roll with it and get through with it. And she obviously has done an amazing job, both for herself and her late first husband and her kids. And she's living testimony to it, and she should be very proud of.
And it also gives us a chance to appreciate the good piece that comes out of that. You know, I think that a young child, could legitimately say, wait a minute, you're not paying enough attention to me. Why aren't you paying enough attention to me, Mom?
I would think so.
And now being able to fully get them to appreciate, I'm sure as older people they do, but to be able to talk to that inner younger child and say, look, Mommy was showing the best love and modeling that she could by taking care of Dad, is an incredibly powerful life statement for them. So we all end up learning a tremendous amount. Yeah?
One of the interesting things that I had to piggyback on what you said about Stephanie, I interviewed Jeffrey, Stephanie's husband, and he talked about basic integrity and being in retail banking and going to the fraud department for banking, realizing just how much fraud and being shocked by it. And, you know, it struck me in terms of like, instead of thinking people were so awful, he's like, but they had to feed their kids. We looked at it very differently. But now, even more so, what he said afterwards was that he always felt as if his mom was hovering over him and very, you know, like under her rule, sort of, and just, you know, he got out finally at 26, and he just said, now, you know, today he has no kids. But he said he just, to the point of hovering, cares about his wife and her family and their marriage and just how much he worries that he's hovering over you. But
he does hover.
I guess about his mom.
I loved his mother. We're only recently married 2 years, but I knew his mother and his father. And my daughter was born on his mother's birthday.
Which was yesterday.
Yes, which is very strange. So his mother knew my daughter from my first husband. Anyway, you do hover, but I know why you hover. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I love it.
That's nice. Thank you. All three of you. Thank you. This interesting constellation.
Yes.
Anyone else care to share? So,
You can't top us.
this is the power of these personal stories. This is the opportunity to unlock some incredible wisdom and some really deep thought as to why we do what we do. And sometimes it's in our subconscious, but it's there. And being able to bring it to the surface, being able to share it, just frankly, this living will moment of being able to look at your husband and say, thank you for the things that you're doing, is extraordinary. I mean, just that moment for me made this entire experience worthwhile. And I hope that each of us got a taste of the power that it unlocks when we have these conversations with other people. So the next question that I'm going to have for you is precisely, for whom are we leaving this? For whom are we talking? To whom are we talking? Because again, I really want this to be a living, breathing document, not a posthumous letter that we leave behind. Because that's great, but it's so much less than what it could be. So, are we saying something to our spouse, to our partner, to a friend, to a family member, whether it's a mother or a father or a sister or a brother? Is it somebody in the community that has just been very close to you? Somebody that you've reached out to who has had a struggle? And I'll go back to a recurring theme that I've shared with you, for you as well. This is an opportunity for us to reflect. What we have just done has probably given you much more fodder for self-reflection today. And chances are that sometime during the course of today or this evening or tomorrow, actually, something's going to pop into your head, and you're not going to be sure of where it came from or why, but it's going to be a connection to something that you are really tied to that somehow bubbled up to the surface because we've had this moment of reflection here. So this will have, shall we say, legs that can continue on, and this power becomes really, really important. But to get to know yourself, to go back to where we actually started today's conversation with Gail's prompt to, we should introduce each other to ourselves. Well, we need to introduce ourselves to ourselves. We need to be able to say, whether it's that inner self, or it's that gut check, that voice inside, or even the little ministering angels that sit on our shoulders every once in a while. Who am I? Not fraught with judgment, because God knows there are enough people that are willing to judge us. I'm not talking about the judgment piece. But an honest assessment of who I am. Am I what I want to be? What might I do more than what I'm doing now in order to have that? And not that we go morbid, but just as a related, or no related thing. The vidui, the confession that we use. It's something that we share on the high holidays. It's part of the service. We actually do something called the vidui. We also do something called the vidui when we're on our deathbed. Part of our tradition is to say a confession. Now, for those of you who are slightly religious or slightly interested in ritual kind of practice, we also do a vidui when we go to sleep. Taking a look at the day. How did we do? Was it good? Was it bad? Where am I ending up for today? Because tomorrow, according to the mystical tradition, when my pure soul is restored to me, I get to start again. So I get to start afresh, but if we remember where it is we left off, we can continue to move forward. So this idea of a vidui, a confession, is not to say, I'm really sorry that I didn't do this and I didn't do that, I should have done this and I could have done that. It's an opportunity to say, I am human. I do have frailties and foibles, but I'm doing the best I can. That's really the essence of the vidui, is not to say, I failed, but to say, I tried. Not how well you necessarily accomplished it, but the fact that you were willing to engage in it. So what this does is it gives us a chance to find out what is that thing that we want to engage in. And that becomes part of the power of this kind of a process. It's reflective for us because it gives us now a chance to build, to be the best that we can be, so that when we're done, we can say, I lived a life of meaning. My life did make a difference. Now, I don't mean the world, changing the world. Well, as our wisdom tradition says, to save a single life is to save the entire world. To have touched another human being is to have touched the world and affected change. And it's in those individual relationships that we make a difference. It's nice to talk about, our 18,000 Facebook friends. But it's much more important to touch the person that you care about and to say, I care about you, and I am blessed to have you in my life. That's not so bad. And if we can accomplish that, and we get a few billion of us floating around the world doing that, I'm guessing it would be a marginally better place. But that's for another day. I'm talking right now about us and what we can do. So what's the next step? What do we do now? Well, for starters, you started. You've already started the process. You've tasted it today. You've heard me ramble on and on, so hopefully some of that stuff is worthwhile. But more importantly, you've actually engaged in the process. And the idea that each of you learned, got closer to somebody, learned about that other person, and learned about yourself, demonstrates the extraordinary power that this process can have. So, okay, what do we do? For starters, I've got those questions that I've shared. It's a starting point, not an ending point. Some of those questions are going to be throwaways for some of you. Some of those questions are going to be incredibly important. And you're going to have questions that you yourself have that aren't on that list, but they're on your list. And that's really the most important thing of all. So think about the things that you think about and make a conscious effort, a deliberate effort to say, this is important to me. I learned in rabbi school, keep a pad and a pencil, and when something comes, open the pad, grab the pencil, and start writing. So I do that. Now, all I need to do now is remember that I actually wrote in it, so I can go back and look. But the idea of unpacking is actually, in and of itself, a good exercise. The other problem I've noticed about this is it's not so good in the shower. or when I'm shaving. Because when I'm looking in the mirror, it's like one of those really interesting, intimate moments, like, what was that I'm looking at? I don't know about you guys, but that first moment when I looked in the mirror and I saw my father, it kind of blew me away. But there it was. There was this really interesting moment for me. So I'm saying to you, keep a pad. You never know. The other thing is, of course, we are a nation wedded to our cell phones. God only knows what I would do without my cell phone. Who called? Excuse me. In the midst of trying to connect to you, I need to connect with God only knows who that is. I'm kidding, obviously. But hopefully I'm making my point. Use this as a tool. Don't use this as an opportunity to be oblivious. My wife actually caught me doing that. She said, when you're in a room and you're uncomfortable, suddenly the cell phone becomes an interesting, you're suddenly looking at the cell phone for all of those messages, and you're the one that's always telling me that the reason you don't pick up the phone when I call is because you turned it on silent because you want to be fully present. So she said, and she noticed that about me. So it was really interesting to catch that perspective. But this becomes an opportunity for us to use the technology. So you can find in here the voice memo thing. If you don't want to do that, you can do a voice memo, Whoosy Wants. If you have one of those Apple Watches, there's the app that you can talk into it. It'll play like you Dick Tracy. So you can You'd say, hey Siri, and something will pop up. Or you can do the video yourself. You know, you can just sort of sit casually and begin to have that conversation. Now, for those of you who are uncomfortable with this particular mode of doing things, find yourself a 3-year-old to help you understand.
And that sounds like a 3.
I mean, as we struggle with this stuff, I mean, they are actually quite adept at it. And as I believe I mentioned last week, and if I didn't, this also becomes a great connector. If you have kids and you're struggling to have conversations that you would like to have, sweetie, could you teach Grandma how to work this phone contraption? I can't make the video work. And just spend some FaceTime, not FaceTime, FaceTime with your child, your grandchild, a friend's child, and just get into that conversation about yourself and your values, the stories. You know, I remember when I was your age. And who knows what comes out? Probably a story worth holding on to. Probably a story that you might find relatively insignificant, but I guarantee you will become indelibly etched in the memory of that other person and will be called upon at some point in time and fondly recollected as part of the who you are that they remember and love. So that's a good one. And again, for those of us that are inept at this stuff, we're old, just face it. The most important thing is to just do it. So thank you, Nike. But make time. Create at least a soft deadline in your own head. Because it's really, this is the thing that could get easily pushed off until, you know, whatever. So in the idea that we'll get to it, we often tend not to. And that becomes a real squandered opportunity for all of the reasons that you've experienced in our time together today. So find some time to do it. Sit down with somebody to do it. Contemplate the questions, the things that are meaningful to you that you would like to share. And as Michael and I were talking about earlier, and actually I think I brought it up, there's an issue with regards to how we are perceived versus how we want to project. I don't mean entering the realm of hypocrisy, because that just doesn't fly. You know, don't say that, don't hold yourself up as somebody virtuous if you're a schmuck, because they'll see through that. But hold yourself up to share the things that you've been trying to struggle with, that you've been trying to engage. Whether it's been a successful or an unsuccessful challenge, depending on where you are in this process. Because they will see you. As I shared, I saw this loving, wonderful, doddering old man who I couldn't love enough more, I think, if I wanted to. But that guy isn't the complete guy. And that piece that I know I'm missing, that experience with the 20 or the 30-year-old, would have been so extraordinary. So for us to really be able to share the stories about ourselves so that they understand what it is that we do. So when I met my grandpa, he was a successful businessman. I didn't know him as the guy who was really, really struggling with everything on the line. Or as my dad would mention during some of the stories that he shared, that the bread and milk as the substitute for rice pudding was actually a dinner that my grandfather didn't really love, but that was all they had. So that understanding of the tenacity and the courage to do the things that they did, those are Depression era stories which shape us. There are all kinds of stories. There are Holocaust stories, which deeply, deeply shape and affect us. And being able to understand the person, not only the person that we see who's lived that experience, but the person underneath, and being able to say and verbalize those things. There's a beautiful give and take which creates a much fuller picture of who it is that we are, and gives them a much deeper and richer understanding of the person that they're connected to, but don't fully know the story. So they'll see it in the way that we live, but then we also get to talk about it to help them understand, he wasn't really stingy. He did the best he could with what he had. That story about the Chinese restaurant resonates very deeply. So, you can get whatever you want as long as it's on the column A, column B for $5 for two. And that was the best that he could do, and it was extraordinary. So to know that, and even for us to be able to be in a place unlike those past generations, to share and be vulnerable in those moments, deepens the relationship that we have. So with that, I'm going to say, in conclusion, this is ours. Make time, make a deadline, give this as a gift. It's a gift not only to the people that you love, but it's also a gift to yourself. Truly a gift to yourself. Jeffrey.
So help me clarify, because I know when we met with the attorney and you do a will, and they share with you, this changes, make sure it's a living, breathing document.
Yes.
It changes, make sure you update it, things like that. And with the stories and learning about ourselves, are we also sharing the stories with whom we want to share our values and whatever? We're doing that as a conversation currently and updating that?
I advocate that, yes. I think that and there's another component which I just sort of glossed over, but there's the sharing with a group versus sharing with the individual. When we do, if you recall last week, we talked about Jacob blessing his individual son, and how personal each one of those blessings became. There's no reason in the world why you can't do that, whether you incorporate that into the broader conversation to the family, by way of example, or you really want to say to your eldest boy here and to your eldest daughter here and give them something separate. That becomes entirely a function of how you see it play out. If there's wisdom to be gained by the son hearing what you're sharing with the daughter, maybe you're so inclined then to do it as a unified kind of a presentation to them. It's really about how you see that playing out. But yes, for me, the understanding is do it while you can still share it. I love the posthumous letters. I think that they're really wonderful and really rich, and for those of us that have actually gotten those, they're incredible. But for all of the conversation that we just had today, it kind of leaves you begging for more. Wouldn't it be great to have more of that conversation? And I will submit to you that at the point in time when we do say goodbye, I've never met anybody who, almost never met anybody who wouldn't have asked for just a little bit more time to have a little bit more conversation with that person. If I only had another couple of minutes, I would have asked. And very, very rarely do we find ourselves in a situation where we're saying, no, it was completely done and finished at that point in time. There is always something more to say. There's always something more to share. Just by way of the picture that I've selected as part of this, this idea, you'll notice that I've been using a sunset on the shore with the family, and that's very purposeful. We are that sunset. And I don't mean sunset of life. I mean the rich, vibrant colors that create our existence. who we are. It's multi-layered. It's there to share with the generations that we touch and the others that we touch. We are truly a sea of wisdom waiting to be tapped. Take the opportunity to tap it. So with that, I want to say thank you again so much to Charles and Marion, and also